The industry has focused on cleaning and disinfecting of surfaces during the pandemic. Momentum is growing to include the air we breathe. With us today to discuss the importance of air treatment technology is Etienne Grignard. He's the founder of Grignard Pure. Good afternoon. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Jeff. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining our program. Tell us all about Grignard Pure and the goals you folks have there at your company.
Well, that's a lot in one sentence, but I'll try. Thank you.
You can have a couple sentences.
I appreciate it. Well, I can start off with the goal. The mission statement of Grignard Pure is very simple. It's to do the right thing. Doing good while growing success together with our partners to bring a solution to the market that will help make a better world, a safer world. Grignard Pure is the first of its kind antimicrobial air treatment. We know that it kills more than 98% of the SARS-CoV-2 virus in the air, where it's believed that transmission is most likely. It currently is the only antimicrobial air treatment approved by the EPA on an emergency basis through Section 18s in several states. The key distinctive part of the Grignard Pure is that it can be utilized in an occupied space, which is a way for us to be able to continue much of the activities that we had done pre-pandemic, social gatherings and things of that nature. Of course, taking into context the CDC guidance, which is on their website. But that's what the Grignard Pure is. The Grignard Pure is, what it does is that it's in the air. It is very similar to the theatrical effects that people are very accustomed to, whether at a house of worship, at a Broadway show, at a concert, however, in much lower concentrations. In fact, it can be utilized at such a concentration that it's not even visible. When Grignard Pure is in the air, what it does is it reduces the viral load in an indoor space. We're not saying that this is a 100% safety measure or that the Grignard Pure should be the only layer of safety, but rather, with what most public health experts say, it should be part of a Swiss cheese approach to protection, which includes the vaccination, which includes ventilation and filtration when possible, which includes Grignard Pure, and which does include hard surface disinfection. We know that the SARS-CoV-2 is transmitted in the air. It's believed that influenza and the common cold are also transmitted through the air and on hard surfaces. So, we have to look at this as a complete layer of protection, so to speak. When the Grignard Pure is in the air, it is around you. And when it's around you, it immediately, if you're an active shedder, it immediately goes after the virus as it's being emitted from a shedder. This will help protect against a super spreader event. We know that it's going to reduce the viral load in a space by greater than 98% within 10 minutes. And when you talk to the public health officials, or rather public health experts, how quickly the Grignard Pure kills the virus is extremely important. Other technologies that are out there, when you look at their efficacy ratings, it'll say kills 99% in an hour. Well, that doesn't do the public any good in terms of safety. We know that the coronavirus and other enveloped viruses die very rapidly, and it's really how quickly can we kill it in that immediate space. So when you asked a little bit about, or the question was, what are the goals of Grignard Pure and what the product does? That's the best of our answer. But then we go into questions such as, who makes up the team? So when we talk about the Grignard Pure and who is the Grignard Pure, how is it made up? We can talk about the company first and then about the technology. They both have the same name, Grignard Pure. And that's very simple. We're led by scientists, engineers, and not marketing people. So we haven't had the most creative of names. The Grignard Pure company was spun off of Grignard Company. Grignard Company is a specialty chemical manufacturer that has been in business for over 50 years. It makes specialty cleaners that are utilized by such entities as the MTA, the Port Authority, SEPTA, New Jersey Transit, and so forth. Grignard Company has a division called Grignard FX, which makes lighting atmospherics that have been utilized for over 20 years with hundreds of millions of exposures. Part of the reason that we were able to become a market leader there is because of our analysis for health and safety of the air that we breathe and so forth. It's based on this type of technology that we were able to bring together a group of independent scientists and engineers whose goal was really the human standard. How can we bring a technology at this time of a pandemic across the world that would be extremely low cost, easy to deploy, that would allow us to be able to be engaged socially? Some of the areas that we were focused on is mass transit, hospital emergency rooms, assisted living. Almost all of the people that make up our independent science and engineering team have elder parents. Many of them are in assisted living. So the thought was that if we could make the dining area safe in assisted living, or a meeting room for outside visitors, it would help with the depression that's led across for this entire age group that have felt like they've been in a jail cell for the last 2 years. I talk a lot about the independent science and engineering advisory team. These are all great scientists and engineers that have never asked for any compensation because they never wanted to have their opinions seemed as biased, because they were involved with this for the human standard. These scientists include people such as Mitch Simpler, who's the chair emeritus of the American Society of Professional Engineering Companies, Jack Caravanos, or Dr. Caravanos from NYU School of Global Public Health, Dr. Ramachandran from Johns Hopkins University. I believe he's the director of the NIOSH and OSHA labs at Johns Hopkins. You have so many scientists. In fact, if people, I believe they're on our website, and you can take a look at the list. It includes several people from the CDC. It includes people from the University of Oxford's pharmacology department and so forth. But this team of scientists and engineers have allowed us to put together the science, run the tests, put together procedures for proving the efficacy of the virus inactivation in the air. This is important because prior to Grignard Pure, there was never a procedure for testing the efficacy in the air. This has been one of the greatest accomplishments of the Grignard Pure team, is putting together this protocol for testing the effectiveness of an air treatment. So that was one goal. Then we had to see how the product worked. And we tested it through this procedure. We did have it peer reviewed by the independent science team. The EPA also reviewed the protocol. I believe they may have had it peer reviewed as well. And now we have a method that we can utilize for seeing the efficacy. One of the questions people ask is, did you test it on the SARS-CoV-2 or on a surrogate? The answer there is that we tested it on the surrogate. Our research, beginning in March of 2020, the SARS-CoV-2 was just too dangerous to aerosolize in the air and then run it in a chamber that gave real-world environments. Many of the tests that we've seen and reports showing efficacy of some of the devices, when you look at their chamber, it's the size of a shoebox. It doesn't give the actual real-world environment. So our team got together. We put the testing in place, and we showed that we could utilize the Grignard Pure, which active ingredient is TEG, and it's only TEG with two other inert materials, because we wanted to make sure, A, that it worked, B, there was a procedure that was reproducible, and then we submitted that to the EPA along with health and safety data. Luckily, we have 70 years of health and safety data. In addition to that, we have hundreds of millions of exposures that have utilized a sister product to the Grignard Pure as a lighting effect at concentrations that were significantly higher, multiple times higher.
Very, very interesting. You mentioned it's the product is in the air. Is there a generator for it?
Yes. So the Grignard Pure is introduced the air through a dispersion system. However, since the Grignard Pure is a product that the dispersion system disperses into the air, it is regulated by the EPA. And this is important to note. When you had made the statement, or I made the statement, that it is at the present time the only airborne antimicrobial approved by the EPA. This is a significant statement. Devices are not regulated by the EPA. There are not standards on filters, UV, bipolar ionization, dry hydrogen peroxide, and so forth. Those are all considered devices. Their efficacy is not measured. There is no validation. Their claims are not reviewed. It's really the Wild West show. Hard surface disinfectants, they have to go through a rigorous process to have them approved for different types of claims. And all their claims have to be reviewed. The same is true with Grignard Pure. Since we needed to be approved by the EPA in order to go to market, all of our claims have been looked at, verified by the EPA. That was almost a 6 to 9 month process of science back and forth.
So does Grignard Pure compete with ventilation and filtration programs or companies?
Interesting. Grignard Pure would work in conjunction with ventilation and filtration. The advantage of Grignard Pure is that it's in the air around you, so it addresses the virus as it's being emitted from an active shutter. Whereas ventilation systems and filtration systems and UV can only treat the air that gets sucked up into the duct before it gets returned. Now, we're a big promoter of ventilation and filtration. However, some of the recommendations that are being made will take years and billions of dollars to implement. You can't very simply go and just put in a HEPA filter because of the wear that's going to happen on the machines, the change out rate. And the fact of the matter is that when you change from a MERV 8 to a HEPA filter, the ACH level will go down. You will not have as many air exchanges an hour, and the filtration goes up. So as we know, it will take years to get proper ventilation installed at many of these locations. The Grignard Pure can work in conjunction with lower ratings of filters that allow for the airflow to pass faster through the system and not affect the ACH changes.
Interesting. So all the talk these days is about the pandemic, but let's talk about the future. What does the future of air treatment technology look like to you post-pandemic? And will it become a normal function in most buildings?
The question of the pandemic, and hopefully it comes to an end soon, one way or the other. In terms of air treatment, as we discussed previously, we know that certain viruses and microbes travel through the air. That is the primary cause of infection. We've already discussed that there will be a need for hard surface disinfection. There will be a need for ventilation. In terms of air treatment, I believe that air treatment will be deployed to those areas of social congregation where it is most needed. It may not be utilized throughout an entire building. It may be utilized in meeting rooms, assemblies, trains, buses, theaters, concerts, and so forth. We have spoken about the SARS-CoV-2. We have discussed that we were tested on a surrogate, which is much harder to kill than the SARS-CoV-2. According to the EPA hierarchy, it is much harder to kill than bacterias or enveloped viruses. We have already looked at other microbes that this product will go after and inactivate, and do it very rapidly, do it even much better than the results that we've already presented. In the future, I see this type of technology being dispatched to emergency rooms, and not the emergency operating rooms, but rather where the highest concentration of viruses exist, which is the emergency room waiting room. A quick personal note is my mother and I, or rather, Jeff, I took my mother to the hospital, and her and I waited in the emergency waiting room. During that time, we were there for about 7 or 8 hours. Now, during this pandemic, everybody who has cold-like symptoms goes to the emergency room. So not only do you have the SARS-CoV-2 potentially in there, you have the rhinovirus, you have influenza, and so forth. My mother suffers from leukemia. She ended up getting the rhinovirus, or the common cold, which went into her lungs and caused an infection that led to pneumonia. For the greater majority of last week, she was fighting for her life, and now she's in hospice. I know my story isn't the only story, but that's an airborne pathogen that could have been prevented. And that's really where I see the future of this going. Not only for SARS-CoV-2, but the rhinovirus, for other types of pandemics and so forth. At least if it's not used every day, to have it in those locations so that when there is an outbreak like the flu that was devastating just a couple of years ago, that we can make certain areas very safe, especially those areas that we need to go to. Houses of worship, for example. That would be one area that I think would be high on the list of being able to have this treatment.
I am very sorry about your mother and your experience with that, sitting in a waiting room like that. Knowing that something could have been done in advance must give you some motivation.
Yes, my mother's the one who put the Winston Churchill into us at Grignard Pure, which is the, never, never, never give up. So that's what we're doing. We're still moving forward. We're moving forward in a dozen different countries right now. We're looking at them accepting the protocols we put forward. And we continue to work with the EPA and with GBAC on getting the word out there, getting the technology out there. And we really appreciate the time, Jeff, for us to tell our story.